Welcome to the Wilderness Season podcast. I'm your host, Sherry Ward. I have a passion to bring hope and breakthrough to those experiencing the toughest times of their lives. In this podcast, we will give you critical insights and revelations as I interview people just like you, those who have been right where you are and understand exactly what a wilderness season is all about. It's real, it's raw, it's practical. Come join the conversation. Welcome to the Wilderness Season podcast. Hello and welcome to the Wilderness Season podcast. And today we have Lorna Lea with us, my longtime friend, and I'm so excited that she's on the show today. And Lorna is a single mom and she has two grown sons who have given her such a blessing, and to be a Mimi, which is a grandma, of four granddaughters and two grandsons who have filled her heart so much with love. And Lorna's passion is to have a healthy heart, both spiritually and physically. And she's worked with Abbott Laboratories for 14 years in their heart health division. And she recently became a certified transition life coach. Wow, that's awesome. To help women navigate through their transitions in life and walk out their purpose with passion. Lorna also has a heart for the women and has served in the House of Hope in Florida. She's led Bible studies for boys in juvenile hall, which we'll talk a little bit probably where that came from, and facilitated women's Bible study groups and helped renovate homes in Houston after Hurricane Harvey. So welcome to the show, Lorna. I'm so glad that you're here today, and I'm just so blessed with your story in the wilderness. And I think that this episode will really show how God comes through with provision. That's what really struck me with your story. So welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
So how many years were you in the wilderness total?
I'd say about 5.
About 5 years? Okay, that seems to be kind of typical. I find 5 or 7. So
Yeah.
sorry if you guys out there who are listening have only been in this a year. We want to encourage you. So we want to give you hope through this. And so how would you define a wilderness? I know that a lot of people talk about it online or on the pulpit. You know, they talk about a wilderness season. What is a wilderness season for you?
I would have to say it was a dark and challenging season for me. It was definitely a season that created space for me to experience and discover more of God, more of his power, and his love for me over my life. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. So what ended up happening? Like, what was there one thing that happened that landed you in the wilderness, or was it a gradual you went in type thing?
No, it was bam. I was in the
Uh-oh.
wilderness.
Okay.
I was just
Wait,
going
what was
through
the
life.
bam?
Yeah. So it was about a week after or a week before my 21st wedding anniversary was to happen. I had discovered that I had been betrayed by my husband at that time. Uh, he had fallen in love with somebody that he was working with and was no longer happy. And so our marriage came to an end. And that led to both of our sons rebelling and expressing their heartache and frustrations
Over that. And how old were your sons? Just so we have a idea.
So at the time our youngest was 16 and the oldest was 20. And then at the time our divorce was final, they were 17 and 21.
Okay. And so what happened after that?
So my youngest one rebelled to just to the extent where I could have never even imagined. He was cutting school, started to experiment with drugs and alcohol, and then eventually started breaking the law and got himself arrested.
Wow, that must have been hard as a mom to see him. Was he like a really good student before that, or?
Yes. Yes. Actually, I should tell you that I was married to a police officer. So they both, my kids, of course, were raised in a home where their father was a police officer. And so they were very much aware of the law and were raised in a Christian home as well. And so, that was difficult going from being in a police officer's home and then being on the other side of the law for sure.
And I know that you, after the divorce, you not only lost the marriage and that relationship, and now your kids are, having anger over the situation and acting out and
Mhm.
have their own set of issues that they're now dealing with. But also you lost community. And I know that we've talked about it in the past, but I've got a husband who's a fireman and your husband was police, and that's a whole community
Correct.
that you have, that you're part of the fire community or the police community. So what was that like for you after that?
Well, after being in that community for 21 years and living that lifestyle for 21 years, and I say lifestyle because it's just different. And I can say that because now I've lived outside of it for some time. And so it is a different lifestyle as far as things that you have to think about that you wouldn't normally think about in your everyday life. So being in that situation and then not being in that situation so abruptly was pretty shocking and hurtful. But there was so much going on with my sons that it took a while before I even really had to grieve that process because
Mhm.
in just a short amount of time, I not only lost my marriage, but I had I was in this position as a mother to work and help and support my sons during their time of crisis.
So were you working at this time too, or did you have to then go out and find a job during this time?
Yeah, so I was very blessed during my married years. I was able to work at the children's school as they were growing up. And so at that time, I was actually working and supporting the dean of the high school that my younger son was attending.
Okay, so you're working at the high was it a volunteer position or were you
No, it was paid, but it was mostly to pay for it was a private school. So really, I was
Oh, okay.
working to pay for his private school.
Right. So now you
Yeah,
had this whole daunting task in front of you, like, how am I now gonna provide as well, right? So
correct.
it hit every area, and I think when we
Yeah.
talk about the wilderness season, sometimes people will say, "Oh, I went through a really hard time financially," or, "I went through a really hard time in this area," and I think when we're talking about the wilderness, it's every area of your life gets hit. It seems like everything gets stripped away
Correct.
in every area. Would
Mhm.
you how do you feel about that? Do you agree with that? That it just seemed
Oh,
like every area?
most definitely. In fact, it was the attorney who told me, you're going to have to leave this leave this job and find yourself a real job. You're going to have to get a real job that's going to support you. Um,
Wow.
yeah.
So it
So,
was attorney that told you that.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
wow. So how do
Mhm.
you feel that God showed up during this time, or what did you hear him telling you, or what are some of the lessons that you learned through this?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, he showed up in so many ways. When you're going through a dark season like that, you can find yourself becoming numb. Uh,
Mhm.
and so you're just, some days you're just going through the motions and doing what is expected of you. And so, in those times when I was actually walking it out and maybe not able to take everything in because I just felt so overwhelmed, God always showed up. So when I needed a job, I got a call from someone that had been going to our church, whose sister worked for a company, um, a high tech company, and they were looking for a contractor. And I never worked in a corporation. And they were like, "Do you want to interview for this job? It's a 6-month contracting job." And God opened the door and he gave me that job. And
Oh,
so
wow.
here I was sitting in a corporate office in an HR department, um, getting a paycheck, more money than I ever thought I'd make. But before I even stepped into that job, I needed clothing because I had worked at the schools, and I just wasn't I didn't have that career set up, right? And
Right, right, the
so,
career clothing, yeah.
right. And so God provided those. I got another call one day from someone who said, I have this bag of clothes, and I felt like I was supposed to call you and see if you wanted them. And I was like, well, what are they? Well, they're dresses and suits. And I'm like, sure. Every piece of clothing in that bag fit me. And it
Oh,
was
wow.
all corporate clothing, suits,
Wow.
blouses. And it was
Wow.
like God showed up in ways that were tangible for me. So I could literally say, wow, God is real. And I'm really experiencing him in ways that I never thought or imagined.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love how he does that, how he shows up in the tangible.
Yes.
Because so much we talk about is like, "Oh, he's so faithful," and it's like, "Okay, but tell me in practical terms, like, what happened?" So, I
Mhm.
love that he showed up like that with you, and I know that you've got some really great God stories with your sons as well. Do you wanna talk about those and how God just completely showed up for you,
Yes.
even in the midst of the hard times and them
Mm.
going through a lot of pain and
Yes.
anger?
Mhm. Mhm. So at the time my son first was arrested, he, I have to remind you, had never been in the court system. I didn't even know where the jail was. But here we were going to have a hearing, and I was sitting there in the room waiting for it to begin when the attorney came and got me and said the judge would like to see you in his chambers. And at that time, I was like, fear.
Uh-oh.
Like, what did
Yeah.
I do? What happened?
Yeah.
A long story short, I found myself in the judge's chambers with the DA and the attorney, just the three of us. And the judge came in and we were sitting at a long, like, boardroom table, and he was elevated up and it had his name and everything. And he walked in his black robe and proceeded to ask me some questions. One of the important questions was if I recognized his name, which I did not. He gave me another name of a woman, and I did not recognize that name. And then he proceeded to tell me that he never shares his cases with his wife, but he was very touched and impacted by my son's case and situation. And so he had shared that with his wife. And long story short, years ago, years ago, like 14 years prior to that, I had worked with his wife and had forgotten that. And
Oh, wow.
I was a nurse assistant at the school where my youngest son was attending. And anyways, she saw the kind of mother I was, and she saw my kids growing up, and she told him, "I know them. I know this family. They're a good family."
Wow.
Um, and long story short, he said, "I want to give your son a break today." And that
Wow.
to me was God sees our past. We're going through life. We're just going through life, living our life. But God weaves these things in and out. And how was I to ever know that 12 years later, 14 years later, um, I'd be sitting in a courtroom or in a judge's chambers fighting for my son's life. And
Wow.
God would use something in the past like that to bring opportunity and a second chance for my son.
So
Yeah.
what happened after that? Did he let him go then, or what did the judge do after that? I mean,
Um,
that's a pretty wild story.
yes, he had him serve his sentence in probation, a 2-year probation, with a warning that because when my son was arrested, it was 3 days after he had turned 18. And so he was being, sentenced as an adult,
Adult, yeah.
and rightly so. And so he had a 2-year probation, but he did give him a warning. Within those 2 years, if you mess up, you will come back and serve your time.
Wow. So he
Yeah,
just let him go then on probation. That's amazing.
it
That
was.
must have been really scary though, to go into the judge's chamber not knowing what was gonna happen and like, just going, "Okay, what" I mean, you probably never saw that one coming.
No, no, I never saw any of this coming.
I think that's the
I was
wilderness.
just
We
living
don't see
life,
any of
right?
it. Yeah, we don't see any of it coming, but
Mm-mm.
it's trust, trust, trust.
Yes,
I think trust is the undergirding of the whole thing. It's we're learning how
exactly.
to trust God through the whole thing and redeeming
Mhm.
those pieces from like 14 years ago, 12 years ago. That's pretty amazing. So
Yes.
then what happened to your son after that?
So he came home and he was living with me, and he messed up. He got the his probation officer found some narcotics in his truck, and if I recall, it was so long ago. It was narcotics in his truck. Took him in. He had to have give a sample, and it came back positive, and so they arrested him, and he was incarcerated after that to serve the rest of his sentence.
And how long was his sentence then?
7 years.
Wow. That's
Mhm,
a long time being that young.
mhm.
So then what happened? How did God show up? I mean, even in the middle of all that, how did God show up?
Yes. So once again, I had no idea what that side of the law looked like, or had never experienced that side of the law. So when it was time for me to go visit him in the facility he was in, one of a girl from high school that he knew called me and just said, "Hey, can I go with you? I know this system. I have a family member that's been in this system, and you cannot go alone. There's some things you need to know." And so,
Wow.
praise God for His intervention and mercy on me too, and my
Yeah,
son, because people know in that setting if you're new and who you are, right? So
yeah.
yes, so she walked me through that and gave me the instructions so that I would be able to do that and do it with wisdom and safety, and in a way that would respect those around me as well.
Oh, that's great. And
Mhm,
she just called you out of the blue.
mhm.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then how did God protect your son? Was he in there that full 7 years then at that point, or how did he protect him through that
Uh,
process of being incarcerated?
mhm. So, interestingly enough, which I didn't know until this happened as well, my dad had a cousin whose son, yeah, I know, who worked in the prison system. And so my dad on his own went and contacted them, and my son was actually being transported to that prison. And so my dad's cousin's son was there when he arrived and was able to just help him process in and have some time to talk to him about what things, to expect and how to be in there, and just kind of giving him some guidance in that
Survival
situation.
skills, right?
Survival skills, yeah.
Surviving, yeah.
Mhm.
Wow, and
Exactly.
he had that time with him to be able to coach him
Mhm.
on how to survive in that prison. Wow.
Yes.
And I think you said that he gave him 2 things too to help him,
Yeah.
right?
So during that time, he was given a lighter, which and a pair of tennis shoes, and which, if you're familiar with the system, you're given like some flip flop things, and you don't have anything until you get money put on your book, so you can actually purchase things at the store. So there's training that goes on and different things like that inside the facility, and so he helped set him up so that there was a message that was sent, right, that there were that my son had things and he had an ability to protect himself.
That's good. That's
Mhm.
really good. So during this time, I mean, that must have been really hard as a mom that your kid's been I think you said a straight A student up to this point, at least a good student in school.
Well, he
And then
was he was a good student. He was a star wrestler his freshman year. He was wrestling varsity, and he had a lot of potential to go places. And school was not his favorite thing, but he did decent and good. He didn't get into trouble. He wasn't a kid of trouble. He was both of my sons were very good students, very athletic, and focused at that time. Yeah.
how did God bring you through? I mean, obviously you've shared a lot about how God physically came through and his provision of really watching over him the entire time. How did it come through for you as a mom? Because that must have been really hard. Your whole life, has felt like it just busted apart. And now
Mhm,
here's your son incarcerated that was never a really troubled kid in the first
mhm.
place. So it wasn't like you were dealing with years and years of this.
Right.
It came out of the blue. So how did God show up for you
Mhm,
through your wilderness as a mom?
mhm. First of all, I had a couple very close girlfriends that knew the Lord. They were just strong Christian women, women of faith. And so they would gather around me, and their prayers and their support, in times when I couldn't get out of bed, or didn't feel like I could really face one more day. um,
Mhm.
they were always by my side. Like they would show up in an instant. Like they were either at the foot of my bed praying for me if I couldn't get out of bed, and they would sit there
Wow.
until I could get out of bed. They would wait for me to get showered and get my clothes on and get going. They were just a true support. My parents were a really good support. As much pain as they were in through all of that, they were very strong. My older son, he was away at college trying to finish his college and stay focused as well. And there were so many times like God would put on his heart, you need to call your mom. And like I would just be in my house and I would get this call from my son that just would feel my heart. Like, Mom, I love you. How are you doing? I'm praying for you. Just reassuring me where he was at. Those kinds of things just kept me focused, would help me stay focused and moving forward. I knew my sons needed me. They needed a strong mom, a mom that had faith, a mom that was a prayer warrior for them. And I believe, I don't think, I do believe that God used that time and that those prayers to not just strengthen me, but to strengthen my sons because they were able to see that. And I was very real about it. Today is
Oh,
hard.
that's
I have
good.
prayer. God is answering. He is faithful.
That's so good. That's really good. And what are some conversations you had with the Lord? I mean, did you get really real with him and say, "Look, I'm angry, I'm mad, I'm upset, I'm," or did you go down the why trail? I mean, we all have had these moments of why, or I'm mad at God, or I'm mad at this person. Like, what was your kind of the backstage tour of the emotions on this?
Hmm. I'd have to say that I was angry about my son because I felt like there were so many things that could have been done to help prevent that extreme, um, the extreme downfall for him.
Mhm,
That was not done. It wasn't like, uh, I wasn't fighting for him in court, but the court system, I'll have to say, is for me, anyways, and for my son, it failed, and in many ways. And so, for parents out there that are experiencing this, it is a tough system to get out of. And I don't know how people do it without the Lord. So there were times I did. It was just so painful, but the anger mostly came out of how he was suffering and his suffering. For me, it was more like, Lord, all my dreams, like you stripped everything away from me. Now what am I supposed to do? Like my identity was really found in my family and raising my children. And so I had to learn, like, who am I? Who am I now?
mhm,
And
mhm.
who am I supposed to be? I mean, do you really have a plan for me? Or was it just to bring me this far and then blow everything up and then just, am I supposed to figure this out? How do I do this? And so in those tough conversations and a lot of tears, um, uh, he just just the compassion of the Lord and the Spirit coming in and bringing a peace, an indescribable peace, and a reassurance that you're not alone. I am in this with you, and you need to trust me. I will help you walk it out. And really, it
Mm.
was a matter of trusting Him, leaning in, and doing things His way. And there were many times I would get like, okay, forget it. I'm taking over. I'm doing this. I'm making that call, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to take control of this situation, and we are going to be done. I mean,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
but that doesn't work. God has a plan and a process, and we can't always see what that is or understand it. It says very clearly in Isaiah that His ways are not our ways, and His thoughts are not our thoughts, and that became very real in my life. And he
Mhm.
showed up in ways that I couldn't even have had imagined or wouldn't have even thought of doing. There
W
was an answer.
which probably really deepens your faith on a whole
Oh,
different
yes,
level,
yes,
whole different level. And
yes.
I'm sure that forgiveness had to come in here at some point. So how did forgiveness at what point were you able to forgive and let go?
Mhm. I'll have to say that it took quite some time for me to really say that I forgive my ex-husband. That took some time because I wanted to blame him for a lot of things, right? And And so that took a few years, I would have to say, quite a few years. But now I can honestly say that I do forgive him, and we all have broken places in our life. And at that time, clearly there was brokenness in our marriage and in our family that wasn't being dealt with. And so, unfortunately, the enemy was able to get in there and have his way. And he had his way for some time. And it was really when I was able to say, Lord, I'm truly nothing without you. I cannot do this without you. I don't want to do this without you. I need you. My sons need you. We need you. And
Mhm.
um, I want to trust you for what you have for us. Show me how to do that. And so it was just a day by day, moment by moment, sometimes of just going back to his word, going back to his promises, being in prayer with him, uh, being still with him so he can just fill me back up. And then just those calls and those letters and running into people and having words of encouragement and just that those things manifesting in my life, his deep love and sovereignty kept me going.
So it sounds like you had to get to a point of fully surrendering, just
Oh
giving it
yeah,
all. Like
yeah.
you were just stripped away of everything.
Thing.
The white picket fence, the community, which I think in some respects, as women, that's even harder. You know, the white picket fence is one thing in the house, but the community that goes with it,
Mm-hmm.
to me anyway, in my wilderness was so much harder than the house itself when it was gone. It was the
Right,
community that was associated with that.
right.
And that gift of hospitality that was gone. It was the neighbors that you knew for 15 years, both sides, that were gone. So it
Yeah,
seems like there was this whole pulling away and just stripping down and surrendering in that wilderness season.
right. And there was, not to take away, there was shame and there was embarrassment and guilt. I took a lot of pride in my family. I took a lot of pride in my sons. I really felt like I was living, my dream.
Yeah, you were
And
on Park Avenue.
yeah, my Park Avenue.
Yeah, your white picket fence Park Avenue, and now it's not so white picket fences
No,
anymore.
no,
Wow,
exactly. Yeah.
wow. What are and then in that forgiveness, if I could go back to that a little bit, was it a gradual coming to "I forgive," or was there, like, one moment or one time where you said, "Okay, God, I'm finally done, and, like, I forgive," or was it more of a gradual letting go forgiveness for you?
It was gradual for me because I had tried many times. Because, in God's word, He says, I will forgive as you forgive, right?
Mhm.
And so many times I was like, okay, I'm just going to forgive. I'm going to write it all out and I'm going to burn the paper. I'm going to, went through all
Rip
those
it
little
up and
steps,
all that,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, went through all
Yeah,
those
yeah,
steps that you read about and
yeah.
counseling, all that stuff, right? And, but it wasn't until one day I woke up and I thought, wow, I feel lighter today. And then I started praying, and all of a sudden it was like, Lord, bless these people, bless my ex-husband, bless his family, bless my son. All of a sudden, all these things that had weighed heavy on my heart, that that I had put so much of myself into, was like, Lord, this is all yours. It's not even mine. I don't know why I was holding on so tight to everything because this is yours. And
Yeah, yeah.
it was then that I just realized, like, wow, we all have our stuff, and God is working on each and every one of us. And I just was ready. I was like, I don't want to hold on to this anymore. I want to really give it to you, because I would give it to Him and then I take it back.
I think
Maybe
we've
there,
all done that.
right? Maybe
That
there was a
push-pull.
justify. Yeah,
Yeah.
needed to
I'll give it, no,
justify
I take it
something.
back. Give it, yeah, I'll take it
Yeah,
back.
yeah,
Oops, too late, got it back, you know? Yeah,
yeah.
that going back and forth.
Hmm.
Then what was, some of the things that you struggled with the most in the wilderness that maybe you heard specifically God telling you something? I know that it seems like in your life and in your story, God really showed up in other people, but was there any whispers in your heart or in your spirit that you felt when you were struggling?
Yeah, I found myself fighting the need to take things into my own hands. Just an urgency to fix things because I wanted
Mhm,
things to be perfect. I didn't want to be embarrassed. I didn't want our family to be shamed. I wanted them to see the good in my sons, both of them,
mhm,
and that we were a good family. And, it's just that things blew up and bad things happen to good people. We were really that family, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it was just me trying to take control and not trusting God with every piece of my heart and every part of my life.
So it's just that full surrender of trust.
Yes. Hmm.
And I know that you said I asked you what was one of the craziest things you've done, and you said you went skydiving in
Hmm.
2016. And why did you do that?
Because since I was a very young girl, I've had trust issues, and from other things in life. And so I just felt like, you know what? It's all about trusting God. I can't put my faith in other people. I need to trust God because He's going to bring people into my life that I need to love, and just trust that He knows everything about them, and He just put them there for me to love. And one day I was thinking, I want to go skydiving. I want to be up there as close, as far away from this earth as I can get without death, and, and just be free and just say, Lord, I trust you, whatever happens. And so it was just this really personal thing for me. And it probably sounds really crazy. And so I thought about it for a few years leading up to that. And
Mhm.
and then one day I just was like, I'm gonna do it. I'm just doing it.
And what was it like after you? Because this was like kind of, it sounds like a culmination of everything that you had been through and just saying, okay, I trust you, God, and we're going to do this trust exercise in the air. Like,
Mhm.
what did you feel anything break off after that? I'm kind of curious.
Yeah, it was like, this is a big world we live in. There's a lot going on. We drive by homes and we don't even realize what could be happening in all those homes that we go by, right? I mean,
Mhm.
people need God, they need Jesus. And so when I was up there and I had this view, this was so overwhelming. Like, my little world is very little. This is a big world with a lot of people who need to know God is real. And so just being up there and just saying, I just want to trust you for whatever you have next, whatever is next. Please help me to trust you, because from here is a whole new view. In my little world, it's so small, but
Mhm.
there's a whole big
Wow,
world
that's
out
such a good lesson. So I always like to close out the show by saying, what is one piece of advice you would give to our listeners who are in a wilderness season? Because a lot of people are in different phases of the wilderness season right now.
there. Hmm.
So what would you tell to our listeners today?
Um, well, let's see. The first thing I want to say about that is that, don't keep the faith. Keep the faith. Do not shrink back. Um, Try not to run ahead of God, because His plans really are perfect. He cannot, we cannot pave a better way than what God has already put into place for us. As much as we try, as much sleep as we might lose trying to do all of that, we're not going to be able to pave a better way than what God has for us. And so trust is key. Trust is key. And remembering that He knows all things. He already knows, He sees these things before we even do. He had things planned out to come full circle before we even knew they were going to happen. And so I just want to encourage people to keep the faith, don't shrink back. Um, our capacity to think and feel are so limited compared to God's. And we need to just keep seeking Him in that. It's really, by doing that, we're a display of His splendor in the land of the living, right? And so
Yeah.
by doing that, we're a testimony of how faithful He is in our story. If we try to take over, yes, God always, provides us a way out. We might go in and mess everything up, and He might have to come back in and help guide us back through it, and
Yeah.
He's ready for that, and He knows all of that. But at the same time, you know if we can walk that walk with Him and trust Him and not run ahead of Him, I think it'll be even a more beautiful story. We'll be surprised.
That's so awesome. And I love that scripture that talks about Peter, because I felt like sometimes when I was in the wilderness, I was so far deep into it, I had to keep going. I didn't have really a choice. I
Hmm.
couldn't turn back, and it's when Peter says, God, where do I have to go but you? I have nowhere else to go. It's like,
Mhm.
so that was such an awesome message that you had. I love your God stories, and I really love how, especially in your stories and your sons, how he showed up practically, and he's a practical God. It's not just all theoretical and
Right.
theology, that as we put our trust in him, that he actually does show up. And so thank you so much for being on the show today. We just want to bless you and your family and your kids. And
Thank
uh,
you.
so we didn't get the end of the story though. Your sons, how are they doing now?
So, I know people always want like this perfect ending, right? And
Right.
the story's not over yet. My sons are doing well. I have to say, they're both married. They both have three children, two girls and a boy, and they're doing life. They're involved in church. They're raising wonderful families. They're doing well, and you know our the things that transpired in the past, there are still some little hurts along the way that we're working through, and God is still healing. In life you can always be triggered, right? Things can
Yeah.
trigger you, and you go, oh, I thought I dealt with that. So we're things
Surprise.
like that might still pop up for us, but we
Right.
handle them in a much different way, right? We handle them differently. We allow God in there more than we ever did. Uh, we've 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 grown to respect each other and appreciate each other where we are, and I think that has been really truly um, God's working after being through so much together.
That's so awesome. Well,
Yeah.
thank you again. Thank you so much. We bless your family and thank you for sharing today on the Wilderness Season podcast.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you.
Thank you. And for our listeners, we're going to go ahead and post the contact information. So if you'd like to reach out to Lorna, we'll go ahead and put her contact information in the show notes. Until next time on the Wilderness Season, we'll talk to you later. Bye bye. Thank you for listening to the Wilderness Season podcast. If you need help navigating through your own wilderness season, pick up a copy of my book, A Journey Out of the Wilderness, available on Amazon. Also, continue the conversation online with us by going to our Wilderness Season Facebook page. For resources and events, you can go to www.sherrylynnward.com. If you have enjoyed this show, please subscribe and review our podcast. Just remember, you're not alone.